Good morning, everybody. I will be presenting my thesis on Big Pharma and the corporate greed within it. On July 4th, 1776, the authors of the United States Declaration of Independence boldly declared that all Americans have the basic right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Isn't that the dream that all Americans pursue daily? And while this dream is taught as possible for all people, starting at a young age, how can any of us pursue this ideological dream when we are suffering from the very foods we eat? Processed foods, high fructose corn syrup, Red 40, and other unhealthy products within our foods are not sustaining us. When children and adults alike unknowingly malnourish themselves, they will inevitably prevent their own pursuit of happiness, as they will battle fatigue, financial and mental distress, and in the worst case, deadly disease. To combat the sickness and disease, pharmaceutical companies created medicines that over time we have all come to rely on. However, it is this very reliance that has led us to Big Pharma, the corruption in large pharmaceutical companies who become more focused on personal wealth and politics over the patients who are once their primary concern. Medical practices, however, were not always corrupt. From the 1st to 7th century, alchemy was used to find the cures to disease. These alchemists sought to find the answer to all affliction, the elixir of life. Though their methods were not perfect, their goal to find the end and cure to all disease is one of virtue. This virtuous crusade was carried on by the first American pharmacist, who began around the time of the Civil War. Pfizer and Eli Lilly were some of the first to come about as a result of the disease killing soldiers during the war. These companies served a broad function with multiple interests, focusing on selling soda cans and hair gel just as much as selling heroin and other drugs over the counter. The men of this time did not focus on the personal wealth or politics of their jobs, but rather they focused on the sick and needy, the people who required saving. However, as time went on and medicine became more successful, these companies began to breathe profits, just as the banks did in the novel The Grapes of Wrath, while the doctors and politicians all pointed to the machine while avoiding any blame themselves. It is quite clear that the FDA, as an entity that is supposed to protect us, has become more focused on meeting the needs of drug companies over meeting the needs of patients. And unless this corruption of regulatory intent is reversed, the situation will continue to deteriorate and worsen. The core problems seen in Big Pharma can be discovered through the historic failure of the Dust Bowl. During this time, families struggled with the bare minimums of food, gas, and land due to the severe market crash that was the root of the Great Depression. They could not afford any services, and for this issue, they turned to help from the government. Rather than help, though, they only received more pain. In droves, tractors ran these families off the land that had been owned by them for generations, tearing both the houses and the land apart. This is echoed nearly a century later by pharmaceutical companies and their unending greed, removing any morality from their minds while instituting a need for drugs in ours. An example of the aforementioned lack of morality is when Big Pharma kicks already sick people down even further. Unable to defend themselves and at their lowest point, these people often quit their jobs and become unproductive out of sheer lack of option. Sick people are not lazy people, but according to the Cato Institute of Washington, D.C., if you pay someone more not to work than they can achieve by working, many will simply just not work, rather than slaving away at their jobs for minimum wage, only to have it sucked away by the prescription medicines they need. They turn to the welfare state and rely on the government to pay for it all. This is seen in the clear struggles of many Americans who cannot afford their prescription medications. Regardless of their poverty or disease, they are cast aside in the pursuit of more profits for Big Pharma. Sorry. Well, yeah, okay. Defenders of pharmaceutical companies will say that these high costs are driven by the research and development required for drugs. However, this does not apply to a drug as old as insulin, which is over 100 years old. They will also attempt to blame these high prices on free market capitalism. However, this is also categorically untrue, as these companies maintain monopolies and eliminate all bargaining on price, and also raise prices far beyond the rate of inflation. The sad fact of the matter is that these companies now seek profit over care. Pharmaceuticals evil is not exclusive to the medical field, though. In fact, a large sum of their money has been put into instituting politicians into the federal government. Pharmaceutical companies should obviously not be in politics. However, they have been lobbying since 1999, and in 2018, they spent $4.7 billion on instituting politicians into the federal government who would give enormous amounts to Big Pharma, effectively scratching the back of the company that got them there. This leads to these politicians voting against regulations that will reform the healthcare system for the better, because they are afraid to bite the hand that feeds them. The moral action is always compromised when money is at stake, which is clearly seen with Big Pharma's constant funding of corruptible candidates that they win over with bribes. Reform seems nearly impossible due to the lobbying present, which has been occurring for decades now. This even happened in our most recent election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, in which Kamala Harris was paid $1.7 million and Donald Trump was paid $300,000. They pay both political parties to bribe their way out of reform and to further prevent any changes to their profits. Another aspect in need of reform is the drug patent system. Patents in the drug industry are used by corporations to keep hold of the exclusive rights of a drug and prevent generic or cheaper versions of the drug from being released. Patents in the drug industry maintain monopolies and prevent free market capitalism from occurring by eliminating all competition available for a drug. This is a system that hurts the consumer, who is forced to pay whatever price the patent holder demands. Patents and exclusivity periods must be shortened as to help produce generic versions of the drug faster. The lack of reform present in the industry is proof that there are problems on an upper level, that being severe lobbying in political offices. Even with reform, though, drugs have become a standard part of everyone's lives. What has slowly been developing is the over-medication of individuals, leading to over 131 million Americans now having prescription medicines. The widespread problem of obesity plagues many individuals, affecting not only their length of life, but their mental health and their motivation to even try as well. The weight loss drugs Mounjaro and Zepbound have begun to be prescribed more and more to these people suffering from obesity. These injections create a sense of fullness that help deal with appetite, but instead of self-control, the drug does the work for you. While the injections themselves are great and have many great effects, the resulting reliance on it leads to people spending approximately $1,200 per month. Most individuals, though, are so positively affected by their new weight and mindset that they forego all other kinds of losing weight, such as the gym or dieting. They instead focus on the positive benefits the drugs provide and misinterpret health as thinness. The pursuit to become skinny is becoming twisted from a healthy desire to a now vain hunger, fueled by the severe body dysmorphia and inadequacy that millions of Americans feel within themselves. People are buying these drugs purely for vanity purposes. We have lost sight of true health as more and more people resort to drugs to solve their problems. Tirzepatide, the main compound within both Mounjaro and Zepbound, was in shortage for 2 years due to not only prescriptions increasing, but also vanity. Whoever pays for the drugs can buy them, and there is no scale of urgency. For example, let's take a girl who wants to buy these drugs to lose 5 pounds to fit in a dress better and evaluate her with another girl who is severely overweight and needs this for severe weight loss. The wise and moral man would say that, of course, the one who needs it more should have it first. However, the current system exhibits a first-come, first-served mentality. There should be a system in place that values the patient based on the urgency and necessity of their condition, similar to the way surgeons operate on emergency operations first. Despite all of this, many people will still excuse Big Pharma's corporate greed as mere business requirements necessary for the running of their corporations. On top of this, they believe that only a minority of people are affected by these high prices, like Jacqueline. I did not mention Jacqueline earlier, but that was a paragraph I skipped, my bad. Just a little brief on that. Jacqueline is afflicted with this rare condition known as ankylosing spondylitis, which requires the expensive biologic medication Cimzia, costing her around $6,000 every month. This condition, if left untreated, will fuse her spine and leave her unable to walk. While the medicine price alone is already a burden on a monthly basis, this price, coupled with their tuition, rent, and other expenses, is simply too much for a young college student to handle. Now, back to that other paragraph. To their credit, Jacqueline is afflicted with an extremely rare condition, which, though sad and difficult, will not happen to the average American. However, put yourself in Jacqueline's shoes and realize that if you were diagnosed with her exact same debilitating condition, the last thing you would want is to be disregarded due to the rareness of your condition. She is punished for the genetics she cannot control, and though her condition is abnormal, she should not have to fear for her future because of it. In the Bible, we are called to help the sick and needy, not ignore them because it is hard to deal with. We see Jesus did this when healing the sick, the blind, and the leper. Though we are obviously not Jesus and cannot measure up to the ease that he did this with, we are still called to follow this order of Christ and help others to good health. The best way to do this and follow this order of Christ is to actually reform the system that is keeping the sick sick. This reform comes in the form of drug negotiation, similar to what is already in Europe. The reason the system is not already in place is due to not only the money raked in by the corporations, but also by doctors, hospitals, and even the pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs for short. Despite all of that, it is still rather easy for these corporations to blame their high prices on the research and development required for drugs. Hold on. The profits made by 10 pharmaceutical companies in the year 2022 was over $112 billion, while still paying their chief executives compensation packages and buying stock buybacks and dividends. On top of this, they also have a flat 21% tax rate due to their existence as a corporation. However, 8 big pharma players only paid about 2% taxes on a combined $110 billion. The tax rates themselves are not a problem requiring change, but rather a showcase that these companies do have the money to lower their prices, but that they just simply don't, due to their corporate greed. Research and development is in no way a dent in these companies' wallets. They obviously do not need the money from overpriced drugs. We see this in their funding from the federal government, increasing from the years 2000 to 2019 from $253 billion to $345 billion. This is seen also in their spending, in which they focus on making their wealthy stockholders richer and also instituting politicians into the government. However, this richness does not only corrupt the pharmaceutical companies, but also other government administrations, such as the FDA. The Food and Drugs Administration was first started in 1938 due to increased pressure from Americans who wanted more safety and regulations. One of their major successes was their blockage of thalidomide, which was used to treat morning sickness. Elsewhere in Europe, this drug was passed and resulted in severe birth defects, such as babies being born without arms or legs. John F. Kennedy praised the FDA for their blockage based on data, not corporate or financial pressure. The FDA at the time was purely funded by tax dollars. However, around the time of the AIDS epidemic, Congress passed and was signed by George H.W. Bush the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which basically meant that the FDA would profit off of drug manufacturers. This system has resulted in drugs coming out at a faster rate and in larger quantities. However, at the exact same rate, more safety issues are occurring. Before the User Fee Act, only 21% of drugs were removed or put into black boxes, which is the highest form of safety alert. After the act, that number rose to 28%. The likely reason for the more loose regulations is obviously more funding for the FDA. The same corporations that are supposedly monitoring these corporations are also receiving 45% of their budgets from them. The more drugs the FDA lets pass, the more profits they rake in. So they naturally loosen their rules whenever possible to increase the money flowing in. As more drugs are invented and passed by the FDA, the more prescriptions the doctors issue out to patients. The largest contributor to more prescriptions, some say, is not the companies trying to force drugs on us, but rather the natural discovery of disease and our poor nutrition. While this is half true, trying to blame nutrition for the core problem, while the pharmaceutical companies are perpetuating this problem, itself makes no sense. This is the equivalent of blaming the plant for growing too large while turning a blind eye to the gardener who nurtures it and helps it to grow. The reason the food corporations try to partner with hospitals and other organizations is obvious. It gives credibility to them and helps to create a loyalty with consumers. But why the companies would partner with them is actually more obvious, which is more money and control. The core and central problem of Big Pharma is the obvious shift from healthcare to sick care. According to the newly confirmed Secretary of Health, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., this stems from our poor diets, the ultra-processed foods we consume, and the FDA's war on public health. Kennedy says that these trusted institutions seem to be acting in concert to generate fear, promote obedience, and discourage critical thinking, and herd 7 billion people to march to a single tune, culminating in mass public health experiments, which are clearly a misuse of the potential good of these corporations. It is my hope that with the appointment of RFK Jr., Americans will realize the truth about Big Pharma's mission to increase our dependency on prescription drugs and cease to neglect their bodies of proper nutrition found in naturally available foods. It is clearly written in 1 Corinthians 6, 19 through 20, that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, and that we are to honor God with our bodies. What better way to do that than to recognize the ways we are being misled by Big Pharma and combat false promises and temporary fixes by nourishing our bodies with what God has provided. It is my hope that there will finally be reform in our healthcare system and that many of the issues present in the industry will finally be resolved. Thank you. I will now open the floor for questions.
Max, that was a lot of statistics and percentages and figures, and you did a good job handling it.
Thank you.
That's a lot of numbers. I don't do numbers.
Yeah.
You and I have had a lot of conversations about your topic, but I'm going to take my question in a different way. How has your research, or has your research, changed how you're going to take care of yourself?
Probably not. I mean, simply put, all of the most terrible foods for us are sadly really cheap and they taste pretty good. So, like fast food and stuff like that is all so almost natural to eat, and it's so simple and convenient, and it is hard to kind of get away from that, especially my age. I don't know. It just kind of is almost natural to eat junk food and just not care.
You just enjoy that while you're metabolizing.
Yeah. Preferably, obviously, I think it would be better if everyone ate a more natural, diet and stuff, but probably not going to happen.
So that kind of feeds into my question, because I was thinking just right here towards the end about this, not maybe just the pharmaceutical industry, but is what you're advocating for, is it treating the symptom and not the actual problem itself, not the cause of the problem?
So you're saying just focusing on...
The reform you're proposing, that you touched on, is that not just one little piece of maybe a deeper issue that's going on here?
Yeah, no, this is definitely a multifaceted issue. From politics to nutrition, this is an issue on almost every level. Like I said, though, reform does seem simply just so hard to do, so I don't really know a good way to really help a lot of that, but I would definitely say, yeah, there's definitely more than just one simple problem here. Hopefully that answered your question. If not...
I have a whole page of questions. I'm trying to fit myself here. Why single out the pharmaceutical industry in terms of lobbying? Because you're saying that lobbying Congress, maybe it sounds like you're saying they shouldn't be allowed to have as much lobbying access to Congress and those who make the rules.
Right.
Why single out the pharmaceutical industry and not any other industry?
The primary reason is that these people, people's lives are in the balance whenever it comes to these companies. And you can say that for nutrition a little bit, but not to the exact same degree. For example, Jacqueline, her ability to walk and function is forever relying on this. A paragraph I entirely missed was my paragraph on insulin, actually. Oops. But that is obviously another life or death scenario that hangs in the balance. And I mean, you look at it, and these drugs cost to make. I mean, you can simply Google it. It's like $2 to $4 to make one vial of insulin, and I mean, but they're charging it at like $332. So the cost to profit is like nowhere near. You know what I mean? Like they're profiting way more than they're spending making.
So what's a reasonable profit? This is another one of my questions. What's a reasonable profit in your opinion if you're saying what the pharmaceutical industry is making is unreasonable? Do you have an idea of what a reasonable profit would be?
I do not, but I mean, obviously, so I didn't say the statistic, but in 1999, it cost $21 for one vial of insulin. I mean, that's like this big or whatever, you know what I mean? And in 2019, that increases to $335. That is like clearly, it's an increase of over 1,000%. That is obviously ludicrous. So I don't know the exact price that it should be at, but that much, you know what I mean? It's obviously not fair to these people whose lives are entirely reliant on these drugs.
Would you be a proponent of the government or some other entity instituting a profit cap for other industries?
Like what other industries would you say?
Any other industry?
Oh, that's not helping. But like, I guess in the case of like
So you're saying, okay, so I'll rephrase the question. So you're saying, hey, this is too much, I think it should be less. Someone would have to come in and say, here's an allowable
This is a determining factor.
cap
Okay.
for this industry. So if that entity comes in and says, hey, for the pharmaceutical industry, here's a cap. So then should that same entity, whether it's the government or some other industry, could they also come in and
Other
should they do to
industries?
other industries? The airline industry, the oil industry, the whatever industry.
Honestly, I don't think so, because I think that's such a different issue. Whereas, I mean, it's not like really concerning people's lives so much. This industry concerns like the life and death of so many people, and
When I get on an airplane, I'm concerned about my life.
I agree. But what you're talking about is prices, correct?
Right.
So that I don't think that has a relevance to that.
Well, but I think that's flawed logic. But keep going.
Okay, sorry.
You did a good job presenting.
Thank you.
With your paper. I'm curious, you did a lot of critique of Big Pharma.
Mm.
Do you have any appreciation for Big Pharma?
I obviously think that, I mean, without them, we would obviously not have any of the drugs that we do. And I do think that a lot of these drugs do help people and that there is a lot of good there. But I just think that there is still problems with the fact that anybody's money is good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there should be some sort of way to determine, like, urgency in these people. Because in the case of tirzepatide especially, which actually was, like, in shortage due to the amount of people buying it, it's not because, like, oh, man, just, like, so many people are getting prescribed this drug. It's, like, people like Drake or Ice Spice, you know what I mean, are buying these drugs just to, like, lose weight and, like, be skinny. You know what I mean? It's, like, they don't actually need the drugs. They're just buying them outright. You know what I mean? So, although I do think there is good, it's obviously, I think, outweighed by the bad.
Gotcha. And so I have a lot of different. Your topic brings up a lot of different questions, but like, I think about Jacqueline, who has AS. Her drug costs $6,000, $72,000,
Mhm.
6,000 a month, $72,000 a year. That's a lot of money.
Right.
But if she doesn't have that, she dies early or is in constant pain.
Mhm.
And to develop these drugs, on average, it's $1 billion for every drug that they develop. And so, like, that's a lot of money. So I can see with, like, insulin and EpiPens,
Right.
crazy increases. For old technology, it's ridiculous.
Mhm.
But for newer drugs, it's expensive to develop. It seems like it's only fair for them to recoup their costs through, and they don't have a huge market for it. So I'm just curious, kind of your reflection on that.
Though the process is like extremely expensive to make drugs, obviously, like I said, their profits are far outweighing that. And I mean, it's odd that, I mean, if they're penny nickel diming it for these drugs and they need to make a profit, why are they so focused on making their stockholders richer? And why are they focused on instituting politicians? You know what I mean? It shows that they're using their money that they have for all of these multitude of other things, whenever I think that it should be consolidated into helping people. And so I don't see that, basically, that makes sense. You know what I mean?
And so then the last question, Trump's making a lot of changes to all of government, right?
Right.
Including the FDA. They just have a new head of the FDA, McAree or whatever his name is, and he just did an interview last week. It was pretty significant. Do you know about any of those?
Do not know.
And a lot of it confirms actually your thesis that Big Pharma has these. They do review boards for drugs, and usually most of these drugs are being developed by smaller biotechs. But actually, most of them go out of business. But a lot of these review boards are stacked with Big Pharma representatives, and so if they want the drug to pass, they say yay. If they don't want it or could be threatened by it, they say nay. And he's basically getting rid of all of those inputs. So all that to say, your topic has a lot of relevance, and a lot of what Trump's trying to do through the FDA is actually addressing some of these issues. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing this issue to our attention.
No problem.
I had 2 questions, and I already asked both of them, actually, before they got to me. So
You got a third one?
I guess I'll just maybe ask, this is something that your family's been involved with, the medical field. And so some of the stuff you may have already had an idea about before you started doing your research. Was there something, though, that stood out to you, that even opened your eyes and maybe even shocked you a little bit?
Actually, to give some credit to Sophia Flowers, she actually talked to me about my thesis one day, and we were talking about PBMs mainly. And I did ask my dad some more about it, and I guess I never realized like just how evil actually the insurance companies are, and I didn't really write about that enough. But yeah, that's like one of the most significant issues is that yes, these companies are making extremely stupidly high prices, but then like at the same time, these people who are supposed to be helping us pay these prices aren't. You know, they're like, we'll stall you with all these generic drugs first, and then we'll give you the real stuff after like a year of you trying generics. It's, you know, it's just really scummy. And I think that's why so many people were happy whenever, I don't know if you know this, Luigi, that guy, yeah. Whenever he killed the, you know, big head of this company, you know what I mean? And it's purely because people hate insurance companies.
Do you have am I stepping on someone's toes here?
I
Do you have
don't
any,
know.
You kind of applied this idea, you talk about a change of the system, I wrote on how, so you talked about this idea of just like you can go to the emergency room, you triage the problems to see who has the highest need versus the lowest need. Do you have any ideas? I mean, I'm asking you to solve a really big problem, but do you at least have ideas about how to triage like the needs of pharmaceutical needs to go to the right people at the right times? Any ideas or thoughts you have about that?
Not particularly. I do remember, this is going to be maybe a bad example, but in Miss Williams, we did like a medical explorations class, and it was like an elective, and I took it, and she talked about how, I mean, she just basically gave us a thing, and it told us all these things about the people, and you had to put them in order of who you're going to operate on first. And I think that obviously this is not applied to all drugs because some drugs are just in such abundance and hordes of them that, you know, you don't really need that. But for drugs like tirzepatide that actually were in shortage, I mean, this is clearly a thing that needs to happen. But yeah, I would definitely just say some sort of thing that like you look at the people who are buying the drugs and look at what they, like their bio basically, and determine who gets it in order, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I have a question. Is America the only place where this is an issue, or is this like global, or is this only America?
This is, yeah, basically. In Europe and all these other places, they have what is called drug negotiation. And they basically talk with the corporations, like your government does, and it's government enforced, and they like force basically the people to like lower their prices and like make it actually a sane amount. But it's done with the corporations, so they still have some say in how much profits they're making, because I mean, at the end of the day, they do deserve money for making their drugs. But yeah, so this is mainly an American problem. Other countries, such as Canada, have none of that. They have maintained prices. American prices, though, have risen over the past 20 years at a rate far higher than the rate of inflation. So yeah, I would say this is primarily an American problem.
Okay, I have one question, and I don't know a lot about plane tickets and where all the, and I was actually looking at plane tickets this morning, realizing that when I think I'm flying, it's gonna cost $2,000 for 3 of us, but if I fly home 2 days later, it's only gonna cost $1,000. It's like, oh gosh, well, what am I gonna do? Anyway, so my
mine is kind of on that, and when Mr. Drawdy just asked his question, so we have the FDA, and it
Right.
seems like they are, so you're saying that the FDA, they are making money
Correct.
off of these very high prices.
Mhm.
So, like, when we have the TSA for travel, it doesn't seem like we hear a lot about the TSA making the same kind of money that the FDA makes
Mhm.
with high plane ticket prices. Like with plane tickets, I don't have to fly, I could drive 13 hours, but I would rather fly 2 hours. But if I'm talking about insulin or, whatever my medication is, I need that to live. It's
Right.
not a convenience thing.
Mhm.
So I don't know how to reconcile,
What Mr. Drawdy was saying.
well, now I want to figure it out. I want to think about it and come up with a solution. I don't know if it
Well,
will, but I'm gonna try.
I actually was tempted to ask him a question about like what about my logic was flawed, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask.
I'm trying to help. I'm trying to
Yeah, I know.
And to me, it does come down
I think
to.
we're out of time. No?
We have these two government agencies, and it seems like one has a better rep than the other. And maybe I'm
Right.
wrong about that. I don't know. But I'm going to help you with some logic if we can see what it is. But you've done a very good job, Max, tackling a topic that has lots of so many different perspectives and vantage points, and lots of. It seems like there are a lot of hands in the pot. When we have this huge problem that we're trying to figure out. A lot of us, we have family members who need this medication, and we don't want to see them, struggle financially for their whole lives in order to survive.
Right.
So anyway, you've done a very good job on your thesis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.